Some acts of kindness can change a life in an instant. The cold winter air of New York wrapped around Lucas Devereaux as he stared out over the balcony of his sprawling penthouse, the fireworks from Times Square reflecting off the glass and snow, painting the city with bursts of red and gold that felt both distant and irrelevant to him. He had spent countless New Year's Eves alone, surrounded by luxury but encased in solitude, the emptiness a constant companion to the power he wielded. Below, the streets glimmered under layers of fresh snow, pedestrians hurrying past, unaware of the quiet observer above. A soft sound from the alley caught his attention, something small, subtle, yet profoundly human. Lucas's gaze followed it instinctively, recognizing the figure of a woman, humble in posture and expression, crouched slightly as she handed a bundle of food to a shivering child, her breath visible in the cold night air. Clara Hayes, completely unaware of the man watching, smiled gently, her compassion radiating in the dim streetlight. Lucas felt a shift in his chest, a tug of curiosity mingled with a sense of recognition that the trappings of his life could not provide. He moved quietly to the edge, stepping closer to the rail, his coat catching the light, his tattoos briefly visible as he leaned forward, absorbing every detail. The care in her hands, the patience in her movements, the warmth in her eyes. Each act, small to the world, carried weight to him, revealing a world beyond his control and inviting him into it in a way he had not felt in years. He noticed the gentle firmness with which she corrected a child's posture, the soft murmur of encouragement, the subtle way she shielded the little one from the wind. It was not a heroic spectacle, yet it was extraordinary, and Lucas could not look away. Snow continued to drift lazily around them, quieting the city's sounds, as if the night itself wanted to preserve this fragile moment. He realized that this single, unguarded act had bypassed all the walls he had built around himself, striking at something deep within, a recognition that power alone was hollow without humanity to guide it. Lucas took a slow breath, the chill stinging his lungs, and allowed himself to feel a flicker of something he had not experienced in a long time: wonder, curiosity, and an unspoken admiration. The world below continued its march, oblivious to the quiet connection forming in the eyes of a lonely mafia boss and a humble mother whose simple kindness had become a beacon in the winter night, a small but undeniable light piercing the darkness, signaling the beginning of a story that would change both of their lives in ways neither could have anticipated. The fireworks finally faded above Manhattan, leaving trails of smoke drifting across the winter sky, but Lucas Devereaux remained standing on the balcony long after the celebration ended. The city below slowly returned to its usual rhythm, taxis moving through snow-covered streets, distant voices echoing between buildings, and cold winds sweeping through narrow avenues. Yet his attention remained fixed on a single figure. Clara Hayes had finished helping the children and the elderly people gathered near the shelter, but instead of heading home immediately, she continued moving through the neighborhood with quiet determination. Lucas watched as she adjusted a scarf around a young boy's neck, smiled at an elderly woman carrying grocery bags, and offered her last cup of hot coffee to a homeless veteran sitting beneath an awning. None of the people seemed surprised by her kindness. They greeted her by name. They trusted her. They expected nothing from her except the warmth she naturally carried into every conversation. Lucas found himself unable to understand it. In his world, everything came with conditions. Every favor created a debt. Every alliance required something in return. Yet Clara moved through the freezing streets, giving away pieces of herself without expecting repayment. Curiosity pulled him deeper. He stepped back inside his penthouse and moved toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the neighborhood. The warmth of the room surrounded him, but his thoughts remained outside in the snow. His luxurious home suddenly felt larger than ever. Empty. Silent. The expensive furniture, the priceless artwork, the endless skyline views seemed strangely meaningless compared to the simple interactions unfolding below. He poured himself a glass of sparkling water and sat near the window, continuing to observe. Nearly an hour passed before Clara finally turned toward a quieter residential street. Lucas expected her to enter a comfortable apartment building or perhaps meet friends and family waiting to celebrate the new year. Instead, she stopped outside a modest building with peeling paint and narrow stairways. The lights inside flickered softly. Through a second-floor window, Lucas noticed a small figure waiting. A child. The moment Clara entered the building, the little silhouette rushed toward the door. Minutes later, through the illuminated curtains, he watched a young girl throw her arms around her mother. Clara laughed. A genuine laugh. The kind that could not be purchased, manipulated, or controlled. Lucas stared at the scene longer than he intended. The child appeared no older than 7. Together they sat at a small table decorated with handmade paper snowflakes and a tiny artificial Christmas tree. Clara removed a paper bag and revealed what looked like a simple meal. Nothing extravagant, nothing luxurious. Yet the little girl smiled as though she had been handed the greatest gift in the world. Something tightened unexpectedly in Lucas's chest. He thought about the extravagant New Year's parties he had attended over the years. The endless champagne. The expensive suits. The crowded rooms filled with influential people. None of those memories carried the warmth of the image before him now. As the little girl hugged her mother again, Lucas realized he had witnessed something far more valuable than wealth. And for the first time in many years, he found himself wondering whether the life he had built was missing the one thing that truly mattered. The following morning, the streets of Manhattan were quiet under a thin layer of snow, and Lucas Devereaux found himself lingering by the large windows of his penthouse, unable to take his eyes off the modest building where Clara Hayes lived. He had watched her kindness the night before, the gentle way she nurtured her child and shared what little she had with others, and the image of her warmth had stayed with him, threading through his thoughts like a persistent melody. Lucas poured a cup of coffee, black and steaming, and moved to the balcony, leaning slightly on the railing, considering the contrast between the glittering, empty celebrations he had attended in the past and the simple, heartfelt moments he had witnessed. Clara emerged from her apartment carrying a small bundle of food for another neighbor, her movements purposeful yet gentle, a subtle determination in her posture that drew his attention again. Lucas noted the resilience in her expression, the care that did not waver even as the city's cold air wrapped around her, the way her eyes softened whenever she noticed someone in need. He remained quiet, observing the rhythm of her life, appreciating how each small act seemed to ripple outward, touching lives in ways he had rarely understood in his own world of influence and control. Time seemed to stretch as he watched her enter a nearby courtyard to help a group of children build a makeshift snowman, the laughter that followed a sharp, vibrant contrast to the stillness of his penthouse. For a long moment, he considered stepping down, making his presence known, but something in the innocence of the scene held him back. Instead, he remained in silent witness, learning about humility, generosity, and courage without the trappings of power. Lucas noticed the subtle interactions, the way she handed a mitten to a small boy whose hands were numb from the cold, the quiet instructions she gave to keep the snowman balanced, the way she smiled when one of the children called her name with excitement. Each gesture, small in its own right, conveyed a depth of character and humanity that he had not encountered in the rarefied circles of his own life. He realized the world could still surprise him, that the measure of a person's impact was not found in wealth, authority, or reputation, but in acts of empathy and compassion, and that perhaps the most meaningful moments were often unseen by the masses. As the morning light shifted across the skyline, Lucas felt an unfamiliar stirring of curiosity and admiration, the beginnings of a connection that transcended social divides, power structures, and his own expectations. Watching Clara, he sensed the story of their lives was beginning, quietly, unassumingly, and that this simple observation of kindness might just change him in ways he could not yet anticipate, guiding him toward a path where compassion, protection, and human connection would outweigh the solitude he had once embraced as inevitable. By midday, Lucas Devereaux could no longer resist the urge to step beyond the confines of his penthouse and see more of Clara Hayes's world. He moved carefully through the quiet streets, the snow crunching under his polished shoes, observing the modest neighborhood where she lived. The winter sun reflected softly off the icy sidewalks, illuminating the small shops and narrow staircases that lined the avenue. Clara emerged again, carrying groceries for her child and neighbors, her movements precise yet gentle, a mixture of diligence and care that caught Lucas's attention immediately. He lingered at a discreet distance, unnoticed, marveling at the way she balanced her responsibilities, her focus unwavering despite the harsh cold and the challenges of her surroundings. Every smile she offered, every small gesture of assistance, seemed to carry weight far beyond its apparent simplicity, a reminder to Lucas that human kindness could be powerful and transformative. He watched as she knelt to tie a child's mitten, her fingers steady and patient, the child giggling softly in return, her voice warm and soothing against the crisp winter air. Lucas's mind wandered to his own world, filled with wealth, influence, and authority, yet so often devoid of genuine connection or meaning. The contrast struck him sharply, illuminating the emptiness that even the most opulent surroundings could not fill. He saw her interact with a neighbor struggling with heavy bags, offering assistance without hesitation or expectation, and the sincerity in her actions struck a chord he had long ignored. For a moment, Lucas allowed himself to imagine a life guided not by power alone, but by empathy, compassion, and intentional care, and he felt a flicker of something unfamiliar: hope. The snow continued to drift lazily, settling on rooftops and window ledges, creating a quiet, almost cinematic backdrop to her simple acts of love. He observed how children instinctively gravitated toward her warmth, how adults treated her with respect born of trust rather than fear, and he realized that this quiet, unassuming woman possessed a form of influence far more profound than anything he had known in his own world. Lucas took a deep breath, noticing the crisp air and the subtle sense of street food and winter fires mingling, grounding him in the present moment. Clara paused to adjust a scarf on her child, looked up briefly, and for a heartbeat their eyes met, though she did not see him hidden behind the tree-lined corner. That brief glance, accidental yet profound, reinforced the connection that was forming silently, a bond of understanding that required no words. Lucas continued to follow her carefully, mapping her route, noting the kindnesses she extended to those around her, and acknowledging internally that her impact was genuine, immediate, and undeniable. As he returned toward a more central street, Lucas recognized that observing Clara was more than curiosity. It was a lesson in humanity, in the transformative potential of small, consistent acts of care, and he felt an unfamiliar but compelling drive to bridge the gap between his world of power and her world of empathy. Knowing that the story of their lives was beginning to unfold in ways that neither could yet fully comprehend. The afternoon sunlight filtered gently through the narrow windows of Clara Hayes's modest apartment, illuminating the small living area where she and her child moved with practiced ease, preparing a simple meal together. Lucas Devereaux watched discreetly from the shadowed hallway outside, unseen, noting the careful movements and tender interactions between mother and child. Clara hummed softly as she arranged the plates, laughter from the child punctuating the quiet room, each sound carrying warmth that contrasted sharply with the stark cold of the streets outside. Lucas leaned against the wall, observing the thoughtful way she managed her small space, organizing it efficiently, cleaning as she went, ensuring every object was accessible and orderly, balancing practicality with love. Her attention shifted seamlessly between tasks, a glance here to the child, a moment to adjust the meal, a soft smile to acknowledge small achievements, each movement deliberate and filled with quiet purpose. Lucas's eyes followed her hands as she handed a piece of bread to the child, then reached to pour a small cup of cocoa, the simple gestures revealing the depth of her care without a single word needing to be spoken. The light from the windows painted soft shadows across her features, highlighting the lines of concentration on her face, the slight crease of worry softened by affection and patience. He noted the resilience in her posture, the subtle strength in her movements, and the attentiveness that could not be taught, but only born of experience and necessity. The small apartment seemed to expand with the warmth she generated, the cold winter outside unable to penetrate the bubble of domestic care she created. Lucas's mind wandered to his own life, the luxury and influence surrounding him, yet failing to offer the same sense of purpose and fulfillment that he was witnessing here in the unassuming acts of a woman determined to provide comfort and security for her child. He noticed how she paused to check the child's coat, adjusting a sleeve, smoothing a stray lock of hair, gestures so ordinary yet imbued with profound significance. Each moment reinforced the quiet heroism present in the daily struggle, the consistent effort to nurture, protect, and maintain normalcy against the backdrop of hardship. Lucas exhaled slowly, feeling the faintest stirrings of admiration, empathy, and inspiration. In observing Clara, he realized that his world of influence, wealth, and control was incomplete without understanding the simple yet transformative power of care, compassion, and persistence. He remained a silent witness, each breath tempered, each heartbeat echoing the quiet recognition that the human connection unfolding before him held more weight than any transaction, deal, or position he had ever commanded. Snow drifted outside, settling softly on window sills and rooftops, framing the apartment in gentle quietude, while inside, warmth, laughter, and love moved in tangible currents, connecting the mother, her child, and the unseen observer who found himself learning what it truly meant to value life, witness kindness, and consider the choices that could redefine the meaning of power. The soft light of late afternoon filtered through the thin curtains of Clara Hayes's modest apartment, casting gentle patterns across the small living room where she and her child were quietly playing with simple handmade toys, the warmth of the space contrasting with the crisp winter air outside. Lucas Devereaux remained in the shadowed corner of the room, having slipped in unnoticed, observing silently as she guided the child through a counting game, her voice steady and patient, laughter punctuating the quiet moments, creating a rhythm that felt natural and reassuring. He noted how her eyes softened whenever the child succeeded in placing a block or answered correctly, the subtle nods of approval, and the gentle encouragement that carried no judgment, only support. Every motion of her hands, the tilt of her head, the warmth in her gestures spoke of a life filled with responsibility and love, where even the smallest actions held profound significance. Lucas was struck by the contrast to his own existence. The penthouse, the wealth, the influence, all powerful, yet often empty, lacking the human connection and vulnerability that Clara embodied effortlessly. He watched as she paused to adjust a small blanket over the child, ensuring comfort, then moved to prepare a simple snack, demonstrating a balance of care and efficiency born of necessity. The light from the window highlighted the textures of worn but well-maintained furniture, the small touches of personality in the room, the handmade drawings pinned to a corkboard, and the modest decorations celebrating the passing of seasons and milestones. Lucas found himself leaning slightly forward, captivated by the authenticity and warmth of her world, realizing that the richness of human experience was measured not in opulence, but in attentiveness, empathy, and the consistent care she extended to those around her. The child reached out to hug her mother, a spontaneous gesture of love and trust that made Lucas's chest tighten unexpectedly, stirring emotions he had long suppressed beneath layers of control and authority. He allowed himself to breathe in the moment, observing how Clara's actions influenced and nurtured, how her quiet resilience and unwavering kindness created an environment where safety and joy could flourish despite limited resources. The faint sounds of distant city life filtered through the window, yet within the apartment, time seemed slowed, each second magnified by the simplicity and sincerity of daily life. Lucas reflected on the lessons unfolding before him, the power of selfless acts to inspire, to connect, to reshape perspectives, and felt an unprecedented desire to step beyond his previous isolation and offer protection and support, recognizing that influence was most meaningful when applied with conscience and heart. As snow began to settle once again outside, dusting the windowsills and the street below, Lucas remained still, quietly committing to a path that intertwined his life with the woman whose small acts of love had illuminated a part of him he had long neglected, signaling the subtle beginning of a story that would unfold with compassion, connection, and profound transformation. The next morning arrived beneath a sky the color of silver, and fresh snow covered the city in a quiet blanket that softened every sound. Clara Hayes bundled her daughter into a warm coat and walked her to school, their hands clasped tightly together as they navigated the icy sidewalk. Lucas Devereaux watched from across the street, seated inside a parked car, not out of suspicion, but because something about their routine had become impossible for him to ignore. He had spent years studying people, predicting decisions, understanding motivations, yet Clara remained different. Her choices were guided by kindness rather than advantage, and every day she revealed another reason for his growing admiration. After dropping off her daughter, Clara continued toward a community center where she volunteered several mornings each week. Lucas followed at a respectful distance and observed as she greeted each person by name. An elderly man struggling with a box received her immediate assistance. A nervous young mother was welcomed with a reassuring smile. Children gathered around her, as if warmth itself followed wherever she walked. The building was simple and worn, but inside it seemed brighter because she was there. Lucas remained outside for nearly an hour, watching through the glass entrance as Clara organized donated supplies and comforted families facing difficult circumstances. What surprised him most was that she never appeared to seek recognition. There were no speeches, no requests for praise. She simply helped because someone needed help. The realization stayed with him long after he returned to his office. By late afternoon, he sat behind a massive desk overlooking Manhattan, yet his attention drifted repeatedly back to the community center. Reports waited for his approval. Meetings filled his schedule. Still, his thoughts returned to Clara. Finally, he picked up the phone and instructed one of his trusted associates to quietly support several neighborhood programs. No publicity, no announcements, no connection to his name. He wanted the help to reach people, not headlines. Over the following days, small improvements began appearing throughout the neighborhood. New winter coats arrived for children. Food shelves remained stocked. The community center received repairs it had postponed for years. Clara noticed the changes immediately. She stood in the center's hallway one afternoon, studying freshly painted walls and newly delivered supplies with visible confusion. "Who did all this?" she asked one of the staff members. The woman simply shrugged. Nobody seemed to know. Lucas learned about her reaction later that evening and found himself smiling for the first time in days. It was a small smile, private and unexpected. Yet despite the anonymous support, he felt increasingly aware that observing from a distance was no longer enough. He wanted to understand the woman behind the kindness. He wanted to hear her voice instead of imagining it. He wanted to know what she dreamed about when nobody was watching. As sunset painted the city in shades of gold and blue, Clara stepped out of the community center carrying a box of donated books. A gust of wind scattered several across the sidewalk. Before she could react, a tall figure emerged from the crowd and bent down to help gather them. Clara looked up in surprise. Lucas held out the final book, their eyes meeting fully for the first time. Around them, the city continued moving, unaware that two very different worlds had just quietly collided. Clara Hayes stared at the book in Lucas Devereaux's hand before accepting it carefully, her fingers brushing the worn cover as snowflakes drifted between them. For a brief moment, neither spoke. The sounds of the city seemed distant, softened by winter air and the quiet weight of an unexpected encounter. Lucas straightened and offered a small, respectful smile. "I believe this belongs to you," he said. Clara glanced at the stack of books she carried and nodded. "Thank you." Her voice was warm, gentle, exactly as he had imagined during the countless moments he had spent observing her kindness from afar. "You are welcome," he replied. The conversation should have ended there. It was the natural conclusion to a simple exchange between strangers. Yet neither immediately walked away. Clara shifted the box slightly in her arms. "You helped at exactly the right moment." Lucas looked at the books and then back at her. "Good timing, I suppose." A faint smile touched her lips. Not many people stop. The words were simple, but they carried an honesty that lingered between them. Lucas glanced toward the community center behind her. "You seem to spend a lot of time helping other people." Clara followed his gaze and smiled again. Everyone needs help sometimes. The answer struck him more deeply than she could possibly know. For years he had surrounded himself with people who measured value through influence, status, and success. Clara spoke about kindness as though it were the most natural thing in the world. "And who helps you?" he asked quietly. The question caught her off guard. For the first time, uncertainty crossed her expression. She looked down briefly before answering. "I manage." Lucas noticed the exhaustion hidden behind her calm demeanor. He noticed the responsibility she carried without complaint. He noticed how accustomed she had become to placing everyone else first. Before he could respond, a familiar voice called out from the entrance of the community center. Clara's daughter rushed outside wearing a bright winter coat and knitted hat, her cheeks rosy from the cold. "Mom," she called happily. Clara immediately brightened. The transformation was instant. Every trace of fatigue vanished beneath genuine affection. She knelt and opened her arms as the little girl ran toward her. Lucas watched the reunion quietly, feeling that same unfamiliar warmth he had experienced on New Year's Eve. Clara introduced her daughter with obvious pride, and the child offered Lucas a polite smile before hiding shyly behind her mother. "Nice to meet you," Lucas said gently. The little girl peeked around Clara and smiled again. Snow continued falling softly around them. The streetlights flickered on as evening approached, casting golden reflections across the snowy sidewalks. For several minutes, they stood together talking about ordinary things. The weather, the neighborhood, the community center. Nothing dramatic, nothing extraordinary. Yet Lucas found himself enjoying every second. Clara eventually adjusted the box in her arms and looked toward home. "We should probably get going." Lucas nodded. "Of course." There was a brief pause before Clara smiled. "Thank you again for helping." Lucas watched her and her daughter begin walking down the snow-covered street. Just before turning the corner, Clara glanced back one final time. Their eyes met. Then she smiled. A real smile. One that carried trust, gratitude, and something neither of them could fully explain yet. As Lucas stood beneath the falling snow, watching them disappear into the evening, he realized that for the first time in many years, he was no longer interested in controlling the future. Instead, he found himself looking forward to whatever came next. 1 year later, the streets of Manhattan were dusted with fresh snow, and the city had a quiet serenity that contrasted with the chaos of the previous winter nights. Lucas Devereaux stood on the balcony of his penthouse, observing the golden light reflecting off the snow and the soft movement of people beginning their morning routines. Yet his attention was fixed on a familiar scene in a modest apartment building across the avenue. Clara Hayes emerged from her building, her daughter by her side, bundled warmly in winter coats and hats, the small bundle of books in Clara's arms serving as both a symbol of care and a connection to the moments Lucas had witnessed before. Their movements were casual, yet each step seemed deliberate, full of life and purpose. Lucas descended to the street level, carefully avoiding notice, yet approaching them with a sense of calm anticipation. As they reached a small park, Clara knelt to adjust her child's scarf, laughing softly at a snowball that rolled too close to them, and Lucas saw the effortless joy that radiated from them, a stark contrast to the solitary existence he had once known. "Good morning," he said quietly, his voice steady but warm. Clara looked up in surprise, her eyes meeting his, and a small smile curved her lips. "Morning," she replied softly. For several moments, the winter air held their quiet presence, the city continuing around them without intrusion, creating a cocoon of peaceful connection. Lucas offered the bundle of books he had brought along, and Clara accepted them with gratitude, the little girl peeking curiously from behind her mother before taking a tentative step forward. "You always find a way to make people smile," Lucas said gently, noting the twinkle in Clara's eyes as she considered his words. She shook her head, modestly, yet the acknowledgement lingered in the air, warm and sincere. Together, they walked slowly through the snow-covered streets, the child skipping happily, occasionally touching each adult's hand for reassurance, and Lucas allowed himself to feel an unfamiliar lightness, a sense that he had been part of something meaningful beyond influence or power. As the sun climbed higher, glinting off rooftops and lampposts, Lucas realized that his world had expanded, that the lessons of empathy, patience, and the quiet strength of human connection had shifted his perspective irrevocably. Clara spoke softly to her daughter, and Lucas listened without interruption, appreciating the normalcy of their interactions, the simple yet profound effect of love and care transmitted through ordinary moments. They paused by a small park bench, and Lucas felt an ease he had not known in years, the weight of his solitude lifting as Clara's presence and the warmth of her life illuminated the path ahead. Snowflakes settled on their shoulders and hair, the city around them humming gently, and Lucas understood that he was no longer merely observing life from a distance. He was participating in it. The future, once a distant abstraction filled with contracts and influence, now held tangible meaning. As Clara laughed with her daughter, Lucas mirrored her smile, letting the simple joy anchor him. And he realized that sometimes the smallest acts of love could create the largest transformations. The morning light reflected on their faces, soft and golden, and in that glow, Lucas knew that their lives were intertwined not by circumstance alone, but by the choices they had made to see, to care, and to act. And the story of that New Year's Eve had become the beginning of a life filled with hope, compassion, and unspoken understanding that would endure.